Shalom, I'm Rabbi Daniel Braune-Friedman, Director of Pastoral Care at Charles E. Smith Life Communities. Hope you're all staying well and staying healthy as we continue to forge on in these unique weeks of our lives. Shavuot is coming this week, and we have gathered together a few videos to help inspire this week and to help enrich your lives. I am very fortunate in my position to work with outstanding leaders in our community, and so I here to present you with 5 of these great leaders. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Happy holiday of Shavuot to all of you. I'm sure that many of you, when you hear the word Shavuos or Shavuot, however you pronounce it, you think of one thing, and that is cheesecake, or maybe blintzes. And that's because these are the traditional foods, dairy foods, which are served on this wonderful holiday. Why is it that we eat dairy foods on the day when we received the 10 Commandments? It goes to a midrash, a rabbinic legend, which tells about how the entire people of Israel were gathered at Mount Sinai to receive the Torah. And they heard those wonderful words spoken by God and Moses. And they were sitting or standing in rapt attention. And then suddenly, from behind them, they heard a very strange noise. They heard the cows mooing and the goats bleating. And they thought, this is more important. I'll let them wait for a while. But as they waited, the noise from the cows and the goats became more insistent. And people realized that the cows and the goats needed milking. They didn't want to break away from this wonderful experience of receiving the Torah. But Moses stopped the proceedings and said, you have to go and milk the cows and milk the goats, because if you don't, they will suffer harm. And we are not allowed to inflict pain upon a living animal. This is called the principle of Tsar Ba'alei Chayim. And the people said, what a wonderful thing. Moses said back to them, the Torah is given to us, v'chai bahem, and you should live by them. It's not just that you should live, it's that all that you are entrusted with should have a good life as well. So even the cows and the goats must have life because of the Torah that we are receiving. So immediately the people went and milked the cows and milked the goats, and then they realized they could eat that or drink that in order to sustain themselves during this holiday. That is the midrashic introduction and reason for eating dairy foods on Shavuot. It also teaches us a lesson, and that is that the Torah is given to us so that we may enhance life, certainly for ourselves, and of course for our families and those whom we hold dear. But even the strangers and even the animals that we encounter, the Torah commits us to giving them life. V'chai bahem. I don't know if you're going to be served blintzes or cheesecake on Shavuot. I hope you are. But even if it's just a wonderful memory of the best cheesecake you ever ate, think about that and realize that this is the meaning of the holiday of Shavuot. We are to give life to all because of the Torah that we receive. And the dairy foods that we eat remind us of that, so that we can do it not just one day a year, but every day. Chag Sameach. Have a happy and wonderful holiday.
Shalom. I'm Rabbi Arlene Berger, and I would like to share a story with you as we enter into Shavuot. Now, as many of you may recall, Shavuot is also known as Zman Matan Toratenu, the time of the receiving of the Torah. Not the time that we received the Torah in the past, but it's receiving. Grammatically, it's known as present continuous, which means just as it sounds, it's today and it's still happening over and over. And that's what it means to be living Torah, to create living Torah. Actually, for each of us to be our own living, breathing embodiment of Torah. So a story. Many years ago, when my children were younger, they're now in their mid to late 20s, so it was some time ago, we were driving home from school. And as some of you may remember, carpool seemed to be the time when the most interesting or the most important conversations would take place. I think there was something about being trapped in a car with no way out. So I'm not sure how we got onto the topic, but I started telling my children about their Nana Harry, my mother. Now, Nana Harry grew up with her mom and her grandmother, and they kept a kosher home and they observed Shabbat. It was a Jewish home. And when my mother would get angry at her mother and at her grandmother, she would mix up the meat and milk silverware because she knew it would get them very angry. And it didn't mean anything to her. Well, my children were appalled. They accused me of lying, of not observing kibud av ve'em, of not observing the fact that we need to honor our parents. They couldn't figure out why I would make up such a story. And my daughter said, Ima, when we get home, I'm calling Nana Harry and I'm telling on you. And as you might recall from your own childhoods, there's nothing for a child like getting their parents in trouble. Okay, so we get home, I call my mother, I'm like, Mom, Jenny wants to talk to you. Jenny gets on the phone, gives me a look, and says, Nana Harry, Ima has been telling the most terrible lies about you. And my mother's like, really? Tell me, what did she say? And Jenny started to explain to her what I told her. At the end, my mother said, put your mother on the phone. And Jenny gave me the phone and gave me a look that was like, you're in trouble. Well, get on the phone. I'm like, yeah, you wanted to talk to me? And my mother starts yelling at me and then stops mid-word. And she says, you know, I'm glad you told them this story. Now it's my turn to be shocked. I'm like, what are you talking about? Why are you glad? She said, because when I was younger, it didn't mean anything to me to mix up the meat and milk silverware. Judaism was a religion of no's. Don't do this. Don't do that. Everything was forbidden. It was joyless. It was confining. But your children, look how upset they got at the idea that I mixed up the meat and milk silverware. Keeping kosher means something to them. They understand why they're doing it. They understand what it means for their life to have Jewish practice in it. And that's a wonderful thing. I envy that because I didn't have that. So I'm glad you told them. I'm like, good, okay. So I hung up the phone, pleased and surprised, and my daughter was very disappointed that I didn't get in trouble. And then I started talking to them, to my kids. And I said, you know, we are very fortunate to be part of a people who years and years and years ago received the Torah, and we received the teachings, and we received the stories, and we're part of a people who are grounded in morals and ethics and understanding of what it means to bring goodness and godliness into the world. And that's what Shavuot, to me, has always been about. How are we living Torah? We're living Torah because we, each of us, with our individual actions, bring godliness into the world by doing good deeds, by smiling at someone, by giving charity, by picking up trash along the side of the road, whatever we do to make the world a better place, that's how we exhibit living Torah. That's how we take something that's parchment and ink, paper, and bring it to life through each of us. So as we go into this Shavuot, I want to wish each of us the blessing of having the opportunity to embody living Torah, to remember each day that it's just the small things that can make a difference. And not only does it make a difference to other people, it enriches our own lives as well. So this story that I just told in this teaching is in honor of my mother, Harriet May Goldstein, whose first yahrzeit was this week. So in my mother's memory, and in the wish of increasing goodness and godliness in the world, I wish you all a Chag Sameach.
One of my favorite stories in the Bible is the story of Ruth, story of great kindness, of redemption, and of love. It's read on Shavuot. We're not sure exactly the reason, but the tradition says the harvest that is found in the story is the harvest of Shavuot. Ruth accepts the Torah as Israel did at Mount Sinai. And by tradition, King David, who's born at the end of the story, is died on Shavuot. So if you don't know the story, it's a great one. Naomi, her husband, her 2 sons, and her 2 daughter-in-laws emigrate during famine to Moab. The husband and the 2 sons die. The women are left without recourse. Naomi decides to return. One daughter-in-law, Orpah, returns to her home in Moab. Ruth, though, clings to her mother-in-law. And the famous line, of course, is, "Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." So they return to Bethlehem, where Ruth gleans in fields of a distant relative of her dead husband, named by the name of Boaz. She feeds her mother-in-law with great kindness. Boaz learns of her kindness. She actually has an opportunity to sleep with him, but doesn't do so. He finds out he can do levirate marriage for her, and they eventually marry. And at the end, she is the great-grandmother of eventually King David. 4 amazing chapters. If you have a chance, please pick it up. It's not long reading. You can follow it. I was studying virtually this past Sunday, though, with Rabbi Benji Siegel, who I knew as the director of Ramah in Israel, and I was one of his unit heads in 1979. So he was doing a new learning for me, which is this story of Ruth is kind of a Jewish Camelot. It's ideal. Everything is close to perfect. First thing that it does is it changes our understanding of King David. Now, if you know King David from the book of Samuel, he's not such a nice guy. He's an adulterer, a murderer, a mediocre father. His family legacy begins with Judah being seduced by Tamar in the book of Genesis. And yet in our story of Ruth, she does not sleep with Boaz. She does only kindness. Ruth, in a sense, creates a new yichus for King David. Unlike the real world, second, this family stays together. Moab itself is created in the fleeing from the city of Sodom and Gomorrah by Lot, who then is intoxicated and sleeps with his daughters. So separation is in the origin of Moab, but Ruth unites and reunites family. Third, this is the first great Jewish feminist story. 2 women cope with the world and meet all of its challenges. They're successful in restoring blessings of health and love to the entire community. Fourth, we know that down through the ages, there's been a great ambivalence toward mixed marriage. Here, the prohibited Moabites are not just accepted, but are a source of blessing to everyone. Fifth, God is not an active participant in the story of Ruth, and yet people become God's hands to execute goodness and kindness. 6, while Judaism is consistently a religion of law, here the law is bent. Moabites are allowed to marry in. Levirate marriage is done not with the closest relative, but a more distant relative. The law is somewhat flexible. 7, kindness can change the world. Kindness can make the world a little bit better. 8, no one is perfect, but Ruth, in this story, seems to be unconditionally good. So story is a kind of Never Never Land. It reads in some ways, perhaps it is historical fiction, but it contains the dream of a perfect society, like Camelot, like Shangri-La, like Arcadia. In our story, we have a moment of hope, hope of a better, more harmonious, more peaceful world, something we pray for all the time and dream of, and in this story are able to treasure.
A few days ago, I had the pleasure of studying with Rabbi Dana Weiss. She's the Beit Rosh for Hadar. She wanted us to learn about discovering and owning our own Torah, and she introduced us to Rabbi Meor Einayim and his ideas around both Parsha Vayetze as well as Shalach. Well, of course, we start with the first one. This is the part of Genesis in which Yaakov is running away, and he comes to a place and he decides to sleep there. So the rabbi wants us to understand how in 28:11, the verse says he took some stones, and then in 28:17, he took the stone. Rashi says that the stones started arguing with one another about who was going to be the one on which Yaakov rested his head. They ceased arguing and became one stone. And so that's the variation and why the reason in the verse. Rabbi Einayim uses the story to make a larger point when he comes to talking about Shalach. He tells us that are, for the sake of discussion, 600,000 letters in the Torah. Yes, we know that that is not true. It's almost double what the actual number is. But for the sake of discussion, we're going to go along with his thinking and consider that there are 600,000 letters in the Torah. And that each of those letters corresponds to the 600,000 Jewish soul roots. Now, that number sounds familiar. It's because, of course, it's the same number of men who left Egypt. And I think that that's exactly the point, that those 600,000 Jewish root souls are basically split among the 15 million Jews that there are in the world. Just like if one letter is missing from the Sefer Torah, a Torah is incomplete. So it is with us as individuals. If one of us is missing in the Jewish world, then Judaism is incomplete. Rabbi Einayim sees the Torah and the divine one, the holy one, as one. And since there's a spark of the Holy One in each and every one of us, and that is represented by a letter that's in the Torah, then we are also connected to the larger point of Torah and Judaism, as well as connected to the one. So stay with me. One of the things that is important to recognize is that some commentators talk about how of the 600,000 who came out of Egypt and that Erev Rav, that it was the Erev Rav that caused all the problems that occur in terms of the arguments and the distrust and the golden calf, and there's no textual support for that. In fact, the text makes it very, very clear that whatever we were before Sinai, after Sinai, we are one people. We are God's people. And so it is with Judaism as it has become and expressed in our time. If one of us is discriminated against because of gender, because of age, because of disability, or other judgments that other people make about who we are and what we don't have to contribute, it is as if, as the rabbi said, they are destroying a world. And also the other is true, that those who sustain the women and people with disabilities and of any of us who have something to offer in terms of Judaism, it is that we are causing Judaism to flourish even more deeply. I share all of this with you because I've become painfully aware about how much I've missed the Torah that we create when we pray and sing and study together. And it's going to be a while before we can do those things in person. And yet, I know that a lot of us are also missing the Torah of those who are no longer with us. And just as our love of them remains with us, so their Torah remains with us. The Torah of loving kindness, the Torah of love, the Torah of laughter, all the different gifts that they gave us, those pieces of Torah are also still with us. And so it is that each of us is worthy in the eyes of the eternal, and each of us is important in terms of Judaism. I don't know when we'll be able to study again, and I'm so looking for it. In the meantime, continue to give your Torah to those who you can. And believe it or not, I'm sure I'm receiving some of it in my dreams. Hag Sameach. See you on the mountain.
Hello, I'm Rabbi David Abramson, one of the chaplains at the Hebrew Home. The holiday of Shavuot is coming, the holiday on which we commemorate the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. When you think about Jewish holidays, there are a lot of unique rituals that we associate with each of our major holidays. When Sukkot approaches, we traditionally build a sukkah, we decorate it with fall harvest symbols, we eat our meals traditionally in the sukkah, and in so doing, we both celebrate the fall harvest, and we also commemorate God's protection of us as we wandered in the Sinai desert so many thousands of years ago. When Pesach comes, we prepare for the Seder. We have exotic ritual foods, the bitter herbs, the matzah, the charoset, we spend the long Seder evening telling and re-experiencing the story of the Exodus from Egypt. On Hanukkah, we light Hanukkah candles to remind ourselves of the miracle of the Maccabees' victory and the miracle of the oil that burned for 8 days. And when Shavuot comes, we eat blintzes. It seems that we don't have many unique traditions associated with Shavuot, as we do have with so many of our other holidays. Is that what Shavuot is all about? Eating blintzes? Oh, and eating cheesecake as well? In fact, there is a long-standing tradition of eating dairy foods on Shavuot, and there are different explanations for this tradition. One interpretation is related to the notion that when we stood at Mount Sinai, we received the commandments, including, of course, the Jewish dietary laws. Before Sinai, the Jews weren't commanded to keep kosher. After Sinai, they were commanded to keep kosher. But, says one traditional explanation, there was a problem. They had no kosher meat. For contemporary people, how do you get kosher meat? Well, under normal circumstances, you go to the grocery store and you go to the kosher area of the grocery store, and there you find kosher meat. But in fact, in the ancient world, having kosher meat was not so easy and not so quick. In order for meat to be kosher, the animal has to be slaughtered in a very specific way. The meat has to be prepared in a very specific way. And according to this explanation, the Israelites simply didn't have the time or the opportunity to acquire and to prepare kosher meat, and so they made do with dairy meals. And so we traditionally eat dairy foods, blintzes, cheesecake, and so traditionally we eat dairy foods on Shavuot to remember this explanation. That's one explanation. A number of other explanations come from an area of Jewish tradition known as gematria, which is Jewish wordplay based on the numerical value of every letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, Gimel is 3, and so on. So when we look at the Hebrew word chalav, which means milk, we see that the numerical value of that word is 40. What does 40 have to do with receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai? Well, remember the 40 days and 40 nights that Moses stayed up on the mountain receiving the commandments from God. We eat chalav, milk, dairy foods, because the numerical value of Chalav is 40, to remember the 40 associated with Mount Sinai. In addition, the numerical value of the Hebrew word gevinah, which means cheese, is 70. And Jewish tradition affirms that the Torah itself has 70 faces. The Torah lends itself to numerous interpretations. 70 faces of the Torah, gevinah equals 7. So we eat cheese, cheese blintzes, cheesecake, and so on, to remind ourselves of the 70 faces of Torah. The final explanation that I want to share with you comes from the biblical book Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, in which we read Devash v'chalav tachat lishonech. Honey and milk are under your tongue. Now, what in the world do honey and milk have to do with Torah? Well, the rabbis teach, just as honey and milk sustain our physical lives, that's what food does, so Torah sustains our spiritual lives. And in addition, devash v'chalav, honey and milk, are not only nutritious foods, they're also delicious foods. And just as honey and milk are delicious on our tongues, so Torah can be and should be delicious in our lives. A few lessons for Shavuot, the holiday on which we commemorate the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. Chag Sameach.
I want to thank everyone for their wonderful words of Torah, and I am truly blessed to work with them each day. I want to end with one more thought, really bringing together all of us, which is exactly what I wanted to speak about, and that is the idea of all of us standing on Mount Sinai, as Sabrina mentioned in her Devar Torah. When 600,000 men and probably 1.2 million people stood together at the foot of Mount Sinai, we welcomed in the words of God. We are told in Rashi, our 11th century commentator, as described from the Midrash, that we gathered at Mount Sinai, ish echad b'lev echad, as one person united within one heart. That all of us, for this one moment, were gathered in unity. A very strange idea, of course, because if we look around us, we have a great passion for the Jewish people. We have a great pride to be Jewish. But we also know that with Judaism comes machloket. With Judaism comes division. Not a division of hatred or animosity, thank God, but a division in opinion. In the early times, we go back to the idea of the varying opinions in our oral tradition, trying to figure out the will of God and the strength of the Jewish people, going all the way forward to the idea of the very famous joke, 3 Jews and 4 opinions, or the person who arrives at an island all by herself and must build a shul. And so she builds 2 shuls, and when she is rescued, someone asks her, why build 2 shuls? And of course answering, I build 1 shul I daven in, and 1 shul I would never step foot in. And so with this, we wonder this question of Rashi, and this answer from the Midrash, ish echad b'lev echad. How is it possible that with this a great idea, this foundational idea of the Jewish people being divided, we come up with this one miracle moment in our lives when we were all together, all united? The commentators teach us that this recognition that the soul of the entire nation emanates from God's heavenly throne, the Kisei HaKavod. We all organically originate from that source as being integral to the spiritual preparedness for hearing God at that one time. Only after we achieve the unique level of unity are we able to hear this shouting pronouncement, I am the Lord your God. Hashem Anochi. The very first commandment where God pronounces that he is our God. Only then can we feel that level of unity. Only then can we be united. We break down everything else that there is about us and just see and feel the soul that is not only between all of us, but is also connected to God. During this time when we are all quarantined, set apart in different ways, in different amounts of people, many of us, just us, in our apartments, in our homes, we feel that we are alone, and we are in many ways are alone. But at the same time, this is the moment for us to be able to look past the usual physical differences that separate us within the Jewish people, but also throughout our entire world. Within the Jewish people, we have many stripes: Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, Ashkenazi, Sephardic, those that eat different foods, those that keep different customs. We know that we all are Jewish, but many times we scoff at others. Many times we make our own viewpoint, our own origins, our own skin color more dominant. Now we have less physical involvement. We may see each other on a Zoom call or a video prepared in advance, but we are often praying alone, celebrating the holidays alone. And so these are moments when, although we feel alone, we also perhaps are not seeing other people. And therefore, we can perhaps rise above the physical and visual reminders of what we perceive to be as a difference. We can relate to the spiritual essence of each person. As we celebrate Shavuot and Shabbat this week, and perhaps Shabbat in the weeks ahead of us, perhaps we take the time to eat alone, or to daven, to pray alone, to celebrate and have joy alone. We know that we're not really alone. We know that there are many other Jewish people and many other of God's people celebrating their own ways to connect to God in different ways at that time. And perhaps we can use this time to rise above the physical and connect to the spiritual as a way to once again feel those moments when we can once again be Ish Echad, B'Lev Echad, once again being one people with one heart. Chag Sameach, a good Yontif, a very happy Shavuot, and Shabbat Shalom, a good Shabbos.